Welcome to Yu-Gi-Oh! Voice Notes. Have you ever wondered how I come up with my unique ideas? Why I forgo or include certain tech cards that others do not? Today I will unveil some of these secrets. With this, you too can develop the skills to come up with your own brand new ideas for the Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG, be it modern or retro. Oh, would you look at that? It's time to duel. So I was just scrolling through the decks that I have on my dueling book collection, and I came across this Ancient Gear Gravekeeper deck. I think I threw this together around the time that I built my Fairy Ancient Gear deck, with the theory that I was just trying to abuse Gear Town to summon Ancient Gear Gajiltron Dragon. At this time I also had some hero variants where you could go Stratos into Skyscraper that you can search with Captain Gold, and you could Gear Town to summon an Ancient Gear Gajiltron Dragon. Because one of the issues with the hero beat deck was that you couldn't really deal with large established fields, and this allowed you to not only attack over things that are bigger than 2800, for example Alias would go to 29 against the Goyo Guardian, or your Stratos would go up to 28 so you could actually kill Stardust Dragon. But eventually I opted not to play the Gear Town package in my Hero Beat deck, as was later shown on the channel with the Hero Beat deck where I actually played Skyscraper, and I played the deck more like a control deck, similar to Hero Beat usually is played. But back to this deck. So you have Gravekeeper's Visionary, which is a level 8 that you can add back off of trade-in. If you were to pitch it, or it just went to your graveyard somehow, you could also bring it back with Rite of Spirit. And thanks to its effect, you can dodge things like Torrential, Mirror Force, or Bottomless Trap Hole, because when this card would be destroyed, you can just pitch a Gravekeeper monster instead. Similarly, it gains 200 attack for each Gravekeeper monster in your graveyard. So if you have a Visionary on the field with, let's say, one Gravekeeper monster in the graveyard, and your opponent were to attack into it with, say, an Armed Wing, well, it's 23, so you would pitch a Gravekeeper that you got back to your hand for free with the Stele, and then it would go up to 2400. Or it would just naturally be at 25 thanks to Necro Valley, should you have this card in play. So with the Gear Town you could apply massive amounts of pressure, because whenever you drew something like Commandant, Gear Town, and a Gravekeeper, preferably had a Spy turn 1 that you flipped up, summon Descendant, pop a card, set a Gear Town, and then you set the Necro Valley on top of it and you summon Gajiltron Dragon, you could poke for quite a lot of damage, and like drawing these cards wasn't the worst either because you had trade-in. And should you have dead trade-ins, you could obviously just add back the Visionary off of Stele, should you have them both. And of course this was after my revelation of Cyber Valley, so I naturally played this card as well. But eventually I just scrapped the idea because it was just too many cards that didn't really do anything together. Like the Visionary wasn't really a win condition, and unlike the Fairy deck where you actually played Mausoleum of the Emperor and Christia, you had some actual lines with the Ancient Gear package where you could kill them through things like Gores and whatnot. But this deck played more like a control deck, that sometimes pushed for a lot of damage and sometimes just fell behind because you sat on like a Gear Town after you already established the Necro Valley. So this kind of concept just didn't work out. However, when I landed back on trying to play Gravekeepers, I revisited the idea that Royal Tribute was not a card you wanted to main deck, similar to my Ancient Gear deck, but from a bit of a different angle. So I feel the math on Royal Tribute does not make sense. You have to worsen your deck by playing fewer monsters, and preferably only Gravekeepers. You could actually warrant playing 3 copies of Necro Valley and 3 copies of Royal Tribute to make it make sense. In Edison Format there is no pot of duality, so there's no way to dig for the missing piece should you just have one of them. And unlike Tengu Format there's no Wander Wand, so you can't really dig deeper into your deck to try to find the missing pieces. And obviously there's no Gravekeeper's Recruiter, so you just naturally had less monsters to begin with. And we're kind of forced to play some more of these, which are not the best, but they're at least names. So I decided just to side deck the Royal Tributes for when you play against decks where they have a lot of monsters, preferably monsters that are not good in the graveyard. Even if you manage to resolve a Royal Tribute, you don't even get to see their hand due to their new policy at a Time Wizard tournament. This goes for both the Ultimate Time Wizard as well as Time Travel if you're in the US. Against a deck like Blackwing or even Vayu, the Royal Tribute is not that good. Against pure Blackwing, they don't play that many monsters, and they play a lot of trap cards, so you can't really apply too much pressure even after you resolve a Royal Tribute. And against Vayu Turbo they obviously have 3 copies of Vayu and 3 copies of Sirocco, so there's a chance you just give them a free Armed Wing. Mind you, this card doesn't even guarantee you a plus. First of all, you have to open with this card, a way to see Necro Valley, and generally a way to see a monster. Because if you roll Tribute turn 1 and all you have are trap cards, your opponent can just pass back and unless you actually draw a monster in your deck, which mind you needs to be monster light so you don't open with free monsters and royal tribute turn 1, you're not gonna apply any pressure and they can just draw into monsters after the fact. If you royal tribute them and you give them free turns before you actually apply some pressure, the chance that they'll see something that they can play with is reasonably high. If you do this against pure Blackwing, well, now they have set up their graveyard for Blizzard, if you even manage to hit something at all. I decided that Royal Tribute was actually a trap. This is not something you want to main deck in Edison Format. The Gravekeeper deck is just too slow with this card in it, because you have to build a deck to be slower. However, if we build a deck more so like a Caliber Cats type of deck, particularly with this very nice interaction, where if you set a spy, you can flip it up to summon Descendant, or your opponent may even attack into the spy expecting it to be a Raikou. Then you can summon Air Golem, or preferably Cat into Air Golems, pop their monster with Descendant, hit them directly and discard a card. And then you can synchro away into like an Arcanite or an Air Golem. I'm also playing the one Raikou partially because if you mind control a hamster, you can summon Raikou from your deck. You can also summon Raikou with Rescue Cat should you just have the cat and really want to make a Catastor or a Magical Android. The Raikou by itself is also not that bad. It's pretty nice to mill some Gravekeepers because you have Stele to add them back. And setting a Raikou, protecting it with a trap, or they just don't attack into it at all, you can do the Raikou Kaius play, which is obviously pretty good, where you Raikou away their back row, which hopefully is a trap, and you Kaius away their monster, so the Kaius will stick. As for the Cyber Valleys, I wanted something that can be used turn 1 and act as a starter card, which Valley is naturally very good at being. You have some pretty nice targets to banish with the Valley's effects, be it something like a Spy, after you flipped it up and got a monster for free, a Raikou, or if you steal something with Mind Control or Brain Control, or if you just have an abundance of monsters thanks to Stele adding a bunch of these back. Sure, you'd be stuck normal summoning a Gravekeeper and a Valley, but at least you get to draw 2 cards, which may come up. But for that reason I'm not playing free copies of Valley, nor am I playing 1-for-1 or Return, because the deck doesn't have anything to accumulate tokens like Dandelion or Scapegoat, nor does it have a way to easily access additional monsters via special summons that you can readily banish with the Valley's effect. Playing Valley in this deck also justifies playing Mindcon and Braincon. Braincon Kai's is obviously a very good combo, and either of these are very strong with the Cats or Air Golem, because we can summon Air Golem, take their guy with Mindcon or Braincon. You do this in this sequence to play around Torrential Tribute. You swing with the Air Golem, hand rip them for 1, and synchro away into whatever synchro depending on the level of monster you took. Although this is still a fairly rough draft, as these are the main 40 cards I wanted to play, but I also had some consideration of main decking a Dark Arm Dragon just to have one more bomb in the deck. The reason why I think Gravekeeper is not a particularly popular deck in Edison Format, why you pretty much never see it do well, is mostly because of the deck being underpowered. In the typical Gravekeeper deck, where people play Royal Tribute, the deck has little to no bombs, meaning the further the game goes on, because you can't close it out by applying a lot of pressure, because the deck is so slow paced, eventually your opponent will see cards like Heavy Storm or whatever kind of blowouts they may need to push through what you have. They can hold a bunch of their cards, and perhaps go for something like a Bryanak push backed by a Solemn Judgment. Just bounce away your entire field and just drop everything and attack for game. The typical Gravekeeper deck also has the issue of you don't play too many monsters because of Royal Tribute, so you're gonna be monster light, which means that sometimes you're not gonna draw a monster at all, and thus you play very few starter cards because the only Gravekeeper starter card is Spy. Like, none of these cards do anything on their own, and there's no Recruiter, which is the Gravekeeper Sangan, and the Sangan is here because it searches cats. That's pretty much the only reason. It's also Tribute Father for Kaius, and being able to synchro away an Air Golem with the Sangan is another way to get it into the graveyard. As for the Gravekeeper lineup, I think it's pretty typical with the free Spy and the free Commandant. Commandant is pretty nice because he goes to 21 with Necrorally face up, so you can attack over opposing Sirokkos and Stratos obviously and whatnot. And Assailant is kinda similar, because when he attacks you can switch a monster's battle position. Thus Assailant can also run over things like Armed Wing, Sirocco, Bryanak and whatnot. What's also nice about Commandant is that you can just pitch him to add a Necrorally from your deck to your hand. So should you have a Stele, something like a Spy in the graveyard, you can draw into Commandant, immediately pitch him to add a Necrovalley, and add them both back with Stele, since this needs to target 2 monsters in the graveyard. So immediately just getting the monster into the graveyard could actually make your Stele live for this card to add back something that actually does something. But the ratios could be tweaked a little bit. Perhaps something like a less reliance on the Gravekeeper engine, playing maybe only 1 of this, or 1 of this, or 2 of this, cutting back Stele to 1 or 2, could allow you to play some other cards in this deck. However, I do think that the Stele providing you a nice grind game is actually pretty valuable. And there's plenty of payoffs for your spy, so you can just continuously add this back and have your spy engine getting you additional monsters to summon, and then banish them with Valley, or tribute them for Caius, or Synchro away for Airbellum. But yeah, you could play one Dark Arm Dragon in the main deck as well. So I suppose if you want to test this out yourself, you can just do something like this and play with 41 and see how it feels. It should for sure be 40, but I'm not sure which card I want to cut if I do want to play the Dark Arm Dragon. The Allure seems just pretty good because you have Stele to add back 3 darks. You have some more darks here as well, particularly if you play Dad, you can banish it if it's dead. So the Allure should be live pretty often. And as for the traps, it's pretty standard for what you'd expect to play in a control deck in Edison format. I'm just maxing out on all the good traps, playing one road because you play a continuous card in the field spell, so you're a bit weaker to Heavy Storm and Black Rose Dragon unlike other decks. You're also a slow paced deck where you want to win in the grind game, so having a road is really nice to prevent your opponent from drawing into a heavy and then being able to push. So you have at least 2 cards in the main deck that could potentially stop that push. And if you have road, a thing to think about is that if you're gonna flip a spy and summon a descendant from your deck, if you expect your opponent not to have bottomless trap hole face down, you could pass priority on the summon of Descendant. Thus you have Descendant and Spy, so if they TT you can road. However, if your Descendant retain priority on summon, tribute the Spy to pop one of their cards, and they chain TT, you can't road because they're just trying to pop the Descendant. A similar play with Gladiator Beast, if you use Test Tiger to try to shuffle back a GB. If you have road face down, there is almost no reason to do this with priority on summon. You should almost always just pass priority, because then they get an option to actually TT, and you can road because you control the Test Tiger and the GB. So yeah, something to think about. You could play more discard traps. I don't think this deck needs to particularly main deck Regeki Break, for the same reason I'm not playing Mystical Space Typhoon in the main deck. But Karma Cut is a bit better because you can at least do something like banish 2 copies of Treeborn Frog, or just banish something in general to deal with it. Dealing with a monster when you banish it is usually better than popping it. And this deck is a bit too slow for Wind Blast. If you put a really good card at the top of the deck with Wind Blast and you can't deal with it next turn, it doesn't really solve the issue. Like Wind Blasting a Monarch against frogs, if you have to do it to deal with it, isn't very good. You could play more Deck Devastation Virus. This depends a bit on the format and what people currently are playing. But right now I'm just testing one in the main deck and one in the side deck, because the deck is pretty slow. You don't really want to tribute away monsters for DDV, because these cards are not floaters in any way. But it is of course nice that the Descendant and Assailant are darks that will be above 2000 with the Necro Valley face up. And the Caius of course also meets the requirement of DDV, as well as Cat into Catastrophe is also a way to have a 2000 attack point dark monster. And yeah, this needs no explanation. As for the side deck, it's not completely finalized, it's just some cards that I'm testing and just generally good cards. The idea is that against decks like Frogs, if they play a bunch of monsters, for example Hero Frogs, you would side in Royal Tribute and Necro Valley, and then you would also want a Summoner Monk, because now you have more spells that potentially could be dead, and having these dead spells, you can then pitch them with the Monk. So it just creates more pairs in the main deck for the Monk. I'm also siding MST and Dust Tornado, mainly against Blackwing, so you could hit their Black Whirlwind. As this is a slow deck, you want to deal with Whirlwind, because you can't really deal with a stream of monsters every single turn. But with MST and Dust, you can just remove the Whirlwind. 1 Trap Stun, 1 Road, 1 DDV, and 1 Iron Wall. These are mainly cards I'm testing. I want to see if I like Starlight Road, so in the matchups that it's good against, I have 2 to see it more often post side, similar to DDV. I want to try Trap Stun because I'm playing the Cats, so against trap heavy decks I can Trap Stun them and then go for Arcanite to pop their back row. But it does require some setup, so I'm not playing 2 copies of this. And the Iron Wall is in theory good against Vayu Turbo, so I also want to try that out. This deck might end up being too slow to play it, and there is some confliction in that your own traps don't work under it, your Caius and Valley don't work under it, so I might just cut this card altogether if I don't like it. There is some argument of siding out Cyber Valley against Vayu Turbo and bring in something like Patchy or Sidra instead, thus that I have less cards that banish and I could actually warrant playing Iron Wall. But the Vayu Turbo deck also doesn't do too much under Necro Valley, so I'm not sure how needed this card is. But it is nice that your Airbellum cannot get hit by a bottomless Deep Prison if you have Iron Wall. But that could also be said about Trap Stuns, so I'm not sure if this card is completely warranted in this deck. There's of course other cards to consider in the side deck. Something like Pulling the Rug might be very good, because it just slows down your opponent's deck. if they're playing something like hero frogs or just frogs in general. And buying turns with this deck is kind of nice, and with pulling the rug you also clear the monster, so Air Balloon can hit directly. As for the extra deck, it's just a bunch of synchros. I'm playing 2 copies of Arcanite Magician because there is an argument where if you flip up Spy and you don't have a Descendant left in your deck, you can at least summon another Spy or a Assailant, Cat into 2 Air Balloon, and then you can make an Arcanite, pop 2, swing, hit a card, main 2, make another Arcanite, and perhaps hit more of their back rows, or 4 cards before you go to battle phase, or you just have more options to go into with 2 Arcanite. There's nothing else you need in the extra deck. There's no other card you want multiples of. So I think this is the one that potentially could come up and have the second copy of. And then it's just a bunch of other synchros. I suppose you could consider Mistworm in place of the second Arcanite. If you have, for example, a Spy and you summon a monster with it, you can Descendant, pop their back row, summons a Cat, summon a Raikou and Air Balloon and go for a 9-star and bounce back like there are multiple synchros and actually push for 25. If you don't pop with the Descendant, you could also play on Stardust Dragon by making the Mistworm. So perhaps I could see something like this instead. I don't think I'm ever gonna make this card, but I'm probably not gonna make 2 Arcanite either, so it might be a fine include, just for the diversity at least of having a Cat into Raikou and Air Balloon with a 4-star play. Also in some weird situations where you like take a level 1 tuner with any of these and you have a Caius and a Raikou, or you take like a Plague and you have a Valley, or maybe there's some way you could also make this card with just other cards than Cat as well, so I suppose I could see it being worthwhile. I think the Cat package is pretty self-explanatory. It's just the same theory that you would play these cards in your Caliber Cat deck, because they're just pretty good cards on their own and they work well with the Spy. There's of course other good standalone cards you could play, like Breaker the Magical Warrior, Kaiku, or Banisher. Probably just in the side deck though for the matchups they're good against. But these are some more good generic staple monsters. Since you're playing a bunch of traps already, you could make the argument of siding some of these cards in. Perhaps not the Banisher in this type of deck because you have Stella and Necro Valley, nor Kaiku because you have Necro Valley, so it's just too many cards that do the same thing, which is the reason why I'm not siding them. But perhaps I could see playing a Breaker the Magical Warrior. It is also a dark spellcaster for Arcanite and Allure, for what it's worth. I also considered playing some of the other Gravekeeper monsters. I considered Priestess because she's a level 3, so you can make a 6 with Air Balloon. But like if I'm flipping up Spy, I'm never not summoning Descendant and popping their back row and going for a hand loop directly with Air Balloon. So I'm not gonna do that. And I also considered playing Sheath, which is actually not that bad. You could play something like you play Sheath, you play Rite of Spirit, and you play more copies of Raikou and Card Trooper, and thus you could also play Pot of Avarice. Maybe I would do something like this in the version of the deck where I cut down on the Gravekeepers and it focuses less on Necro Valley, but at that point you're probably just playing a worse Caliber Cat deck. But the Sheath on its own is actually not that bad. If you want to try this card out, you'd probably be cutting a Caius for it because they kind of serve a similar role of being a payoff tribute, but I think Caius is just a safer bet. If you guys have any experience with Gravekeepers in Edison Format, let me know in the comments. I'm gonna keep tinkering with this, and if I think it's good enough, I might even do a deck profile of it on the main channel. But until then, take care and have a good rest of your day. If you enjoy my content, make sure to also subscribe to my second channel, linked in the description box down below.